Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History of the United States. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States with Mike Allen. Pardon the hair. Getting a haircut today. I know I look like a woolly mammoth. My regular stylist is out, so I had to rearrange things. Anyway, as always, I am reading from the 15th anniversary edition of Patriots History of the United States. And if you have an earlier edition, the headers may line up, will probably line up, will be the same headers with one or two exceptions, but the page numbers are obviously going to be off. So don't be too concerned if the page numbers are off a little bit. Just a little inside baseball. A new printing is when they run out of books and they print more. And at that time, since everything is on PDF or Word or something like that, you're allowed to make changes within a page, changes that don't affect pagination or don't affect the index. But in a new edition, it's essentially a new book, as was this one when they put this out in 2019. And so they treated it as a new edition with a little new marketing and everything else. And in that case, you're allowed to make extensive changes. Basically, redo headers, redo page numbers, redo the index, add, delete stuff. However, you must do that within the context of the size of the book overall. That is, we have a book that is just under 1,000 pages with index and with all of the source notes, the end notes, introduction, all that sort of stuff. We're not really allowed to go beyond that 1,000 pages. So whatever we add in to any new edition, we have to take something out. So frequently I get people, where's the story of so-and-so that you have in the earlier edition? Didn't you talk about this? And the fact is, we just have so much material to squeeze into this limited space that somebody has to go. So what we tried to do is make all of that available at the wildworldofhistory.com under blogs. And there's other headers you can explore there. I have 40 or 50 mini articles, each of about 2 or 3 written pages on a wide variety of subjects. Many of them were taken from Patriots history, or what in the movies you'd call outtakes. They're very good. We just didn't have room for all of them. And then there's a whole bunch of new ones on there as well. Also, you want to check out, if you haven't, the VIP on wildworldofhistory.com. If you're a homeschooler, if you're an instructor, you really need this. It has 5, or is it 6 now, ongoing video lesson programs that are not a part of the regular curriculum. So if you own the curriculum and you're teaching from the curriculum, wonderful, thank you. But there's still more stuff out there, including I don't know, about a 10-part series on the 1619 project that I call the 1620 default. And it's very important to understand why America's exceptionalism, not our origin, which was Jamestown, but our exceptionalism came from Plymouth. Plymouth and the Puritan influence is what made America different, in that it was the first nation, we were the first nation in history established with common law and a Protestant, mostly Protestant religious tradition, which is important from purposes of bottom-up governance, as you've heard here in the series. So that's really critical to understand. There's also a series on Reagan, the American president. There's a really good series about different things called Enduring Lessons on Life and Citizenship that your kids really need. One of them has to do with the connection between time and money. And if they get this, they will really understand how prices work and why you can't ever, with any good conscience, say, oh, that's an obscene amount of money for that guy to get paid. Why does he deserve that much money? Well, you can do a little bit of math and figure out that people like Bill Gates, like him or not, are getting pennies for their service to you every day when you turn on one of their computers. Each time you turn on a PC and you're using a Bill Gates originated product, let's say he gets a penny. Well, people do that hundreds of times a day. Billions and billions of people around the world do that hundreds of times a day. And if you generate a penny every time you do that, you start to see this guy makes a lot of money, but he makes a lot of money because he has products virtually everywhere. So you begin to understand in these little vignettes the relationship between time and money, how money is really just a physical representation of your time, talent, and energy. Okay. Money is a physical representation of time, talent, and energy invested in some product or some service that you have provided to somebody else. And they have given you some of their time, talent, and energy for that product or that service. So when you begin to really understand how it works, whether it's inflated or deflated, doesn't matter. It's still at some level a manifestation of that time, talent, and energy. There's also a new lesson series on Churchill. I'm dealing with integrity through many, many people, and Churchill's the first. I think there's 7 lessons on Churchill. Anyway, the VIP is a wonderful resource for educators and homeschoolers. I hope you'll take advantage of it because it's only $6 a month. And believe me, once you get into it, you're going to see that there's, well, okay, I also did almost 2 years worth of webcasts each Wednesday night, each on a different historical topic, fully researched and developed. It's like getting 2 years worth of additional history lessons on different topics from Europe and the Crusades all the way to present time. Anyway, check it out. Okay, let's get started. We are in Chapter 5, Small Republic, Big Shoulders. We are at the header, Democracy's First Test, and this is on page 158 of the 15th anniversary edition. Whereas Hamilton crafted the major Federalist victories of the 1790s, Vice President John Adams dutifully defended them. After Washington, unwilling to serve a 3rd term, finally announced his retirement in 1796, Adams became his party's de facto standard bearer against Jefferson in the nation's first contested presidential election. At an early point then, the nation came to this key crossroads. Could the people transfer without bloodshed? Could the people transfer power without bloodshed from one group to another group holding views diametrically opposed to the first group? Now, it was said of Washington by many people that him stepping down voluntarily in 1796 was one of the most amazing acts in all of human history. That here was a guy who had total control. He still had the vast majority of people behind him. Yeah, there were Republicans, as they were called, Jeffersonians, who didn't like him. But by far, he was the best loved man in America. He could have stayed on another term, but he chose to step down. And that was just an amazing act by all historical standards. Federalists enjoyed a distinct advantage thanks to Washington's popularity and the lateness of his retirement announcement. The Republicans did not dare announce opposition until it was certain the venerated Washington would not run. Yet Jefferson's population equaled that of the tempestuous Adams, and the two joined in a lively race debating the same issues that raged in Congress: Jay's Treaty, the Bank of the United States, national debt, and taxation, and especially the whiskey tax. So under Washington, it was almost like England in that it became very difficult to attack the policies and not attack the man. I made this point before, but England has some advantages in their system. There are also disadvantages, but some of the advantages are: in England, they have a parliament, and the House of Commons is vastly, vastly more powerful than the House of Lords, which has almost no power whatsoever. And out of that House of Commons, they elect a leader, a prime minister. So their prime minister comes from their equivalent of the House of Representatives here. They don't have a president. The prime minister is not the president. He basically has to go back and get the support of Parliament for every single thing he does. As you know, in our system, the president can and often does act outside the will of Congress, the Senate, and the people. And because of our removal process, which is a 2/3 vote of the impeachment, impeachment by the House and a 2/3 vote of the Senate to remove, it's almost impossible to remove any president, no matter how much the other party hates him, as in the case of Donald Trump, or the people are concerned about his behavior, as in the case of Bill Clinton, or even both parties don't like him, as in the case of Andrew Johnson. Those 4 examples, none of whom was removed, despite some real serious concerns, either by the other party, which may or may not have been true in the case of Trump, or were definitely true in the case of Andrew Johnson, where he clearly violated a federal law deliberately, or were kind of on the borderline with Clinton. What was really under investigation with Bill Clinton was his lying and obstruction of justice. And although it was not their duty to do so, I've said this before, but I want to make it clear, although it was not their duty or authority to do so, the U.S. Senate usurped its authority and basically took on the House's job and said, these crimes are not worthy of high crimes and misdemeanors. That is not the Senate's job. Senate's job is only to say, did he do what he was accused of doing and was indicted for doing by the House? And in Clinton's case, he absolutely did. In Andrew Johnson's case, he absolutely did. In both cases, the Senate said, those don't rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. No, and they threw him out. In the British system, though, if there is severe opposition within Parliament to the Prime Minister, they can force a vote of no confidence, in which case the Prime Minister at that time has to call for brand new elections. I mean, you can imagine that in our country at various points. Let's say, had that happened to Prime Minister Richard Nixon in 1974, he would have been forced to call for a vote of no confidence, and he would have lost, and we would have replaced him. Possibly it would have happened to President Ronald Reagan in 1982 with the economy down in the tank, or to Jimmy Carter in 1979 with the gas crisis. I mean, there's with President Bush in 2007 with the financial crisis. But that doesn't happen in our system. But in the British system, if there is a lack of confidence, Parliament can call for a vote of no confidence, and the Prime Minister must call for brand new elections at that time. Why am I going through this? Because throughout all of that, in our system, if a president is removed, okay, it is the removal of the leader of the country as well as the leader of the government, or to use Ronald Reagan's pronunciation, the government. In England, when you remove a prime minister, it doesn't change the leader of the country, who is who? The king or the queen. And so the way it works over there is you take down a prime minister, like someone like, let's say, Tony Blair, and throw him out. God save the king. God save the queen. You see their structure of country administration, in theory, hasn't changed. Only the functionaries within the government have changed below them. So the advantage they have that we do not have is that opposition to the government is not opposition to the country. What we saw in Vietnam, or again, to use Lyndon Johnson's pronunciation, Vietnam, what we saw in Vietnam was that opposition to the policies meant opposition to the president, which meant opposition to the country. And so people were burning American flags. So that doesn't usually happen in England, because to burn the British flag is to attack the monarchy. And you're only trying to change the policies and the prime minister. So their system allows people to maintain a type of loyalty to the country while expressing and acting out on dissatisfaction with the government. And do you understand the point here? So Washington stepping down was a huge, huge deal, because it meant that the head of the country was stepping down, and it, for the first time, put us in a situation now where we were going to have to elect a president who might not be accepted and welcomed by the entire country. All right. Adams's worst enemy turned out to be a former ally, Hamilton, whom the vice president referred to as, quote, a Creole bastard, and whom Abigail Adams termed Cassius, out to assassinate her Caesar. Hamilton distrusted Adams, whom he considered too moderate. Today, we would call that person in the Republican Party a rhino. So Hamilton distrusted Adams, whom he considered to be a rhino, and schemed to use the Electoral College to elect Federalist Vice President candidate Thomas Pinckney to the presidency. Similar machinations would emerge in 1800 when Hamilton and Aaron Burr both tried to manipulate the Electoral College for their Machiavellian ends. Under the system in place at the time, the electors voted separately for president and vice president, leaving open the possibility that there could be a president of one party and a vice president of another. Bundling the two together did not occur until later with a constitutional amendment. Here was the thinking on this. Oops, lost my bookmark. The founders had anticipated that each state would vote for its own favorite son with one vote, and for the next best candidate, the real president they expected, with the other elector. So the idea was that if you're in New York, you vote for someone from New York to be president with one electoral vote, but then you vote for Adams with the other electoral vote. And the difficulty there is that the guy with the second highest number of electoral votes becomes vice president. So it was entirely possible you could have a Federalist president and a Republican vice president, which is exactly what we got, or reverse it in 1800 and have a Jeffersonian or Republican president, Jefferson, and a Federalist vice president, Adams. Now, put that in terms today. Can you imagine President Trump being Biden's vice president? Wouldn't that be fun, right? Or Hillary Clinton having been Donald Trump's vice president? You can see how that just is not tenable. And it's one of the few things the founders didn't think through when they came up with this system. They were brilliant and just just came up with almost every eventuality, but there were a few things that they just didn't think of. Adams won with 71 electoral votes to Jefferson's 68. Pinckney gathered 59, and Aaron Burr, Jefferson's vice presidential running mate, finished with 30. Yet it was a divided and bitter victory. Georgia's ballot had irregularities that put Adams, in his capacity as president over the Senate, which counted the votes, in a pickle. If he acknowledged the irregularities, the election could be thrown open because no candidate would have a majority, in which case it would go to the House of Representatives. I'll explain that in a minute. Adams took the unusual step. Now listen closely, because this affects Patriot Day, as I call it. January 6th, 2020. It's not January 6th, it's Patriot Day. Listen to what happens. Adams took the unusual step of sitting down when Georgia's ballot was handed to him, thereby giving the Jeffersonians an opportunity to protest the ballot. Jefferson, aware of the incongruities, instructed his followers to say nothing. After a moment, Adams affirmed the Georgia ballot and thereby assumed the presidency. This constitutional confusion, which would soon be corrected by the 12th Amendment, made Adams's rival Jefferson his reluctant vice president. Adams seemed not to mind this arrangement. Remember, Adams was totally ignored in Washington's administration. So he figures he's going to do the same thing to Jefferson, thinking that at least, quote, there, if he could do no good, he could do no harm. But the arrangement was badly flawed, ensuring constant sniping at the administration from within and a reluctance to pass legislation because of the anticipation that a new election would bring Jefferson into power. Indeed, Jefferson and Madison immediately began to look to the election of 1800. All right. So, some recent stuff. This shows you how relevant history is here recently. On January 6th, 2020, the vice president was Mike Pence, Donald Trump's vice president, but also president of the Senate, presiding over the Senate in his constitutional duty. What was that duty? This remains in dispute by a wide range of constitutional scholars. Don't be fooled. There is no consensus, or was no consensus at that time, as to what the duties of the vice president were, because the Constitution says really that he will open the ballots. However, the rules of presiding over the Senate involve what he is allowed to entertain from the chair of the president of the Senate. So here's one view, the view that they are currently attempting to persecute President Trump over, which was that Mike Pence had no choice but to just sit there and open whatever they handed him. That was it. Another view is that he could refuse a disputed ballot, as is implied here by Adams's sitting down. That had Adams chose to do so, he could have he could have just said Georgia's ballot is incorrectly filled out or doesn't have the right number of electors or whatever was the problem with it. Say, therefore, it is not valid, and send it back to the Georgia delegation in Georgia to fix, which would have taken some time. A third view, and that is the one that most of the supporters on Patriot Day, January 6th, wanted Mike Pence to do, was to entertain a motion from the floor. Again, this is very clearly stated by Adams's actions here. Adams expected Jefferson's people to make a motion from the floor to disqualify the Georgia ballot, which worked in Adams's favor. And Jefferson, equally understanding of the Constitution, urged them not to do so. He didn't say they didn't have the authority to do so. He just said, let's not do it now. And the reasoning is that Jefferson did not want to provoke a constitutional crisis in our first non-Washington election. He did that out of patriotism and love of country, not out of political or structural procedures. So it is very clear by Adams sitting down and pausing the count. A, he had the authority to pause the count. B, he had the authority to entertain a motion from the floor. C, he had the authority to reject the Georgia ballot altogether. Instead, he waited to see what would happen, and there was no objection from the floor. So Adams counted the Georgia ballot, which went in his favor, and he became president. Now, on January 6th, Patriot Day, what Pence was expected to do by everybody, I'll say everybody on Trump's side, and what he had indicated 2 times in public speeches just the previous 2 or 3 days. Twice he had said that he would ensure that only legal ballots were counted and would not accept any illegal ballots, words to that effect. So he led all of Trump's followers and supporters to believe that he was going to entertain a motion from the floor, which was constitutional, legal, part of the Senate procedure. He's president of the Senate. And the motion from the floor had to come from 1 senator and 1 congressman. Remember, they're meeting in joint session. So all the Congress and all the senators are there. So if you get 1 congressman and 1 senator to move to challenge a slate of electors, in this case, it was a bunch of slates. It was Arizona, it was Michigan, it was Wisconsin, it was Pennsylvania, it was Georgia. Because there were irregularities, to say the least, in all of these. Was there fraud? It hasn't been proven yet, but I keep saying the 2020 election was sort of like a magic show in Las Vegas. You know it's magic. You just haven't yet figured out how the magician did the trick. It's just me personally. I personally believe it was stolen through the 2,000 mules. I do not think it involved a lot of machine or Dominion voting machinery fraud, because that, in many cases, places where they had Dominion machines, there was no change in the vote. But in many cases, like Arizona, there were paper backups for all of the machines. So someone would have had to have somehow inserted the same exact number of paper ballots in dozens and dozens of counties to match up with the machine count. I don't think that is possible. I think that the machines counted the ballots right. There were just millions of illegal ballots. That's just my opinion. You can have a different opinion. I think it was done the old-fashioned way. I think they just stole it through more phony votes. But we'll see. I do believe the truth of this will come out at some point. At any rate, back to our story. On January 6th, what was expected by Trump supporters everywhere was that when Mike Pence got the first of these disputed ballots, a member of the House, I think it was Josh Hawley, Missouri, and I cannot remember which representative it was, were going to offer a motion to challenge the slate of electors. At this point, it was expected that the vice president, as president of the Senate, would say, we have a motion to challenge the slate of electors from, let's say, Arizona. The houses are thereby instructed to return to their chambers and debate the challenge and report back after the debate. Boom, slams a gavel. They should have been adjourned to 2 houses to debate these challenges. Now, we know what would have happened in the House of Representatives, which was controlled by the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi, which was nothing. They would have come back out after 5 minutes, say, we took the vote, there's nothing wrong except this slate. The outcome in the Senate would have been only slightly different, in that what everyone hoped was that evidence of the fraud would have been presented in the chambers of the U.S. Senate. Now, I maintain this wouldn't have made much difference anyway, because A, the proceedings would have been in secret, so the public still never would have seen evidence of the fraud. B, the Senate was not going to vote to overturn a slate, even if it was highly suspected to be fraudulent. So all that would have come out of that would have been a discussion, maybe an hour, of the fraud involved in many of the electoral slates. Was it real? Was it not? Blah, blah, blah. They would have hashed that out. But then the Senate would have voted, no, we accept the slate, and come back out. In other words, I think the outcome would have still been the same. That is, both houses would have accepted the slates of electors, but there would have been some discussion of the potential fraud. Would it have made the public? I don't think so, but that's just me. However, what's important for us is it is very clear from what Adams did, and Jefferson's going to do the same thing again in 1800. So we have already 2 examples, but we're going to have more, that the president of the Senate, in his or her capacity, can reject slates, can entertain motions to challenge slates, or can simply accept slates. That's part of their job as the president of the Senate. That's not mentioned in the Constitution because it's part of the job of the president of the Senate, which is mentioned in the Constitution. And all rules pertaining to how you operate the Senate are handed over to the Senate. And the Senate has decided that these were powers granted to the vice president as president of the Senate. Now, last little thing. How do we know that's the case? Because right after this happened, they changed the rules of the Senate to prohibit this from ever happening again, to make sure that no vice president could ever reject a slate. So if Pence didn't have the power to reject the slate or send the slates to the houses under an objection from the floor, why did they have to change the rule? See, they had to change the rule because it was clear he did have that authority. So just a little more, shall we say, outside the lines here. Currently, and I'm speaking this as of August 2023, President Trump is under indictment from this. Well, never mind. He's under indictment from this guy, Jack Smith, and special prosecutor for January 6th, Patriot Day. And as part of that indictment, they're trying to say that Pence did not have this authority. And Pence is now changing his tune to say, I didn't have that authority. When clearly he told audiences on 2 separate occasions he did have that authority before Patriot Day. So the danger for President Trump right now is that if he gets on a debate stage with Mike Pence and says anything at all to Mike Pence, whether it's related to elections, whether it's related to foreign policy, whether it's related to the border, it doesn't matter what it is. If he so much as addresses Mike Pence, who now is a witness in this trial, this sham case drafted by the Smith guy, if Trump says anything to Pence, he could now be additionally charged with witness tampering. See how that works? Just my opinion. I don't think Mike Pence was ever a legitimate candidate. I don't think he ever thought about running, but I believe that we can later talk about who they are, were basically putting Pence up to run in order to make sure President Trump could not address these issues in debates and during the campaign. Because by addressing those issues, they could say he was witness tampering. All right. let's see. That's pretty good. Let's stop there today. I mean, we've gone on for quite a while. We will get back very soon. We're going to have another election, and the same thing is going to occur again. We're going to see a similar opportunity for Adams, this time Adams as for Jefferson, this time as vice president, to have a say in his own election, which is wrong. I mean, that shouldn't happen. I mean, there still needs to be exclusionary rules in the Senate that prohibit a sitting vice president from acting, good or bad, in any way in an election in which he is involved. That still needs to be addressed as a constitutional amendment. All right, I will see you guys back here on Friday.